Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club, and I am finally finishing, yes, the Optima Pro from Estes. The clear coat is on, so this is basically ready to put on the final finishing touches. So the upper part of the rocket, there's not really anything to do with that. I have not actually attached part of it though. That would be this part right here. I put that the coupler there in so I could paint it a little bit more easily, but it needs to be attached finally, in a permanent fashion. So I'm actually going to get rid of the the upper top half of it for a moment. And even before that happens, I need to put in, well, I don't need to, but I'm going to put in the rail buttons. So pour them out. There's all the hardware. I already drilled the holes into these, and I test fit them a few times too. So I punched them in first, and then I used my hobby knife to kind of clear things out. So hopefully this will work at least on the first or second try. So I have it just kind of being held in my fingers, and I'm going to try to push it through the hole. Typically I do this facing downwards, but since I've already done it, it's not all that bad. Alright, so that's in. The button has an up and a down. You want the up is countersunk, so the screw will fit into it. And then there's the screw. I'm only going to hand tighten these. You certainly could tighten them up with a screwdriver if you want, but you don't really, it's not super important. You don't want it obviously flopping around, but you don't need it really, really tight either. Alright, so that's the front, the back. This one, be more careful with when you drill it out, because the back end here, well, it's right up against the motor mount's wall. And this is really quite thin here. There's not a whole lot of material keeping everything together, so you want to be careful with that. So in it goes, like so, and there. Alright, so that's taken care of. Buttons are in place. The next thing that I need to do, like I said, is put this coupler in. I'm just going to make sure it fits up to the line without any trouble, which is, it actually will go quite a bit, well, not a lot farther, but a bit farther than that before it hits the rail button. So I just want to make sure that fits. Normally I would just glue this in place and be good to go, but when I was fitting this together earlier, it was more difficult to get it into the top part than the bottom for, I'm not entirely sure what reason. So I'm gonna dry fit it again just to be sure that I can get it back in. The tube's a little chewed up here from maybe from my earlier work, so I'm just gonna run my hobby knife along the part that is a little chewed up just to kind of straighten that up. And you could certainly run some sandpaper over that too. There we go. Alright. Yeah, a bit of sandpaper wouldn't be the world's worst idea there either. Hopefully you don't need to go that route. There we go. Okay, so it fits more or less. Okay. I'm going to then attach them. Wood glue is all you really need for this. While it would be nice to have, and you could use something stronger, I guess, but you really don't need to. This is just cardboard. Oops. So I won't worry about that. What I would worry about is making sure that all the stuff in here, so the parachute and the shroud lines and the, oops, glue's a little bugged, and the shock cord. You wouldn't want them to get gluey, if at all possible to avoid that. There we go. Anyway, so I'm going to put the glue, I'm not going to put it right on the edge, I'm going to put it a decent distance in, and that is actually quite clogged. Let's clean it out. I have a feeling that I may have left this open at some point in the recent past, and it ended up clogging, gluing itself in place. So let's see if I can't. Yeah, there's a does appear to be a bit of a clog in here. Yeah, there we go. I have to do this increasingly often because, I don't know, I think I'm getting more and more forgetful about whether I actually closed the spigot or not. I would hope that would be better. There we go. Alright, anyway, back to the action here. Just be careful about getting glue on your fingers when you're doing any of this, because you have probably a nice finish and you don't want that to get all messed up by getting some glue on the finish. Alright, I'm going to shake this down a little bit to make sure everything is reasonably far. There we go. Alright, then in goes this coupler and up to the halfway line that I drew earlier. Whoops, sorry. Yeah, camera got in the way. Alright, and then I'm going to repeat the process. Put a little bit of glue on the inside here. This one, for whatever reason, I didn't have much trouble getting it in this side. Unclear as to why it would be more difficult on one side than the other, but that's how it was. Sometimes that'll happen. And here we go. Wouldn't hurt to slide this around a little bit just to spread the glue out. I don't think it really matters where the decal goes, but I think I'm gonna center it. I don't want this big decal. I don't want that lined up with the rail button or with the launch lug. So I'm gonna center it on this section that doesn't have either of those, or that has neither of those. All right, so that's good. This thing's awfully big, which is great. You know, it's fun and exciting, but it is a little on the clunky side for my purposes here. Alright, there are two other quick things that I want to do. Both of them involve kind of aggressive gluing. So the last thing I want to do is, well, next to last thing I want to do is I'm going to use up the last of my epoxy clay here. And I'm going to use the epoxy clay to reinforce the back here where, ooh, well, that's not a useful glove. I don't know what happened to that one, but that was not made to exacting standards. Alright, well, let's try that again with maybe a glove that isn't destroyed. Anyway, what I have here is, as I mentioned, it's epoxy clay. It is clay embedded with epoxy. Here it is. This is the last little bit that I have, so it's probably a bit on the dried out side, but it's time to replace it anyway. So I am putting on a glove again because it's epoxy, and the rule of thumb is don't mess with epoxy. You know what, I think I need another glove. I need two gloves for this. That's fine, I got plenty. So anyway, the epoxy clay is also a binary, just like the epoxy glue. There we go. So in this form, geez, it is two colors of clay. There's a silvery interior part and there's a dull gray exterior part. And I just need to get the hobby knife. You know, like I said, this is the last traces of it, so it's a bit on the crusty, dried out side of things. Let's clean that up. Alright. Anyway, once you mix these two together, it forms a strong glue. But of course, in order to do that, I'm going to get this out of the way. That's better. You need to mix it up with your fingers. I was hoping I would be able to do this with just one hand, but since there's like a plastic or metal cap on the end of it, since it really didn't want to give up the ghost, I'm just going to grab the second glove, and it's probably easier to do with two hands anyway. So the idea here is you're just going to kind of knead it together until you have a pretty uniform color of light gray. And once you got that, then the clay is good to go. It will dry and turn into a very strong adhesive, which is exactly what I want. And I'm going to run this to make a fillet along the interior there. Alright, so that's pretty well mixed up. And then I'm going to make this into a preschool style snake. And then I'm just going to put that snake along. There we go. Yeah, some of this stuff just does not really want to roll out right. Anyway, I'm going to put this in against between the body tube and the motor mount. You probably could have done this before this step, but I wanted to do it after I put the rail button in. Alright, so I'm going to avoid the rail button. That's kind of the point here. So let's roll this so the rail button is facing up. And then, alright, well, I'm just being not cooperative. Try to use gravity as an assist here. Alright, so anyway, I'm just kind of jamming it in there. It's not going to go the whole way around, but remember, I'm okay with that. And yeah, you know, I didn't paint really in here, so that's kind of the reason why I don't really mind doing this absolutely last. It's not like it's going to affect the finish, because there isn't a finish here. Here, you can see, hopefully, as I'm getting this in there, it's building up a fillet of sorts. Oops. Yeah, I don't know what the deal is with this part. It feels like there's something not epoxy in there. But should do. And there we have it. Alright, so epoxy clay in there. Again, don't touch that stuff. It's not to be trifled with. Alright, one final thing then, and that is we need to put this guy, not that, I don't know what that is. We need to put the retainer on. This is just going on right here. It requires a bit of glue. Now, I think the instructions for some reason always call for epoxy on this. I'm not entirely sure why. I generally don't use epoxy for this. I just use CA because it is easier to use. A quick little layer, and then one quick motion, and it is on. Now, I have this time, and I often do, I end up squeezing a little bit of this stuff out. So I'm going to mop that up now and hope that there isn't any extra. It would be a wise idea to test a motor in here before you fly this, because if it ends up, you know, if you get a decent amount in there, it'll make it so that you can't get the motor in. You'll have to sand it or use a hobby knife to get things the way they should be. Alright, so that finishes the build. It is ready to fly. I'm going to leave this off for the time being, but otherwise, all done. So thanks for watching, and hope you try this yourself. This was a fun build. See you another time.